Hey, welcome to another episode of Tea&Gab Podcast. I hope you take away any reflections. Grab your teacup and let's gab. Cheers!
Hello everyone, and welcome to Window into the Seminary podcast. My name is Brother Ricardo, and I am from Venezuela. And this is Brother Gabriel. Brother Gabriel, we're really happy to have you here in Window into the Seminary podcast.
Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure. Nice to be here.
So I know that you want to speak to us about this great book that you read. It's called Resurrection by the famous Brazilian author Machado de Assis. But before you speak to us about the book, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I would like to share a little bit of my vocational story. I actually visited the seminary my first time when I was 9 years old. I joined the Apostolic School later, which is our high school seminary. I was 15 and was very providential. All of these 6 years from 9 to 15, I think God was preparing me to join. And I did, and later I moved on to novitiate and now here in humanities. It has been such a great time, really delving into spiritual life and having this relationship with God is something that is special, I think is unique. And yeah, living this vocation is something that really, I can see God's plan in my life. I can't tell what He's gonna do with me in the future, but I can see every day now what He's doing. So that's amazing.
Yes, I can imagine. Brother Gabriel, can you tell us about a specific moment where you felt the calling, where you realized that God was telling you that this is a place where He wants you to be?
Yes. When I was 9, actually, I visited the seminary, and after this weekend, I had a desire in my heart. I really didn't know what it was, but I knew that there was something, because everything that I was doing, I was an altar boy. Before this visit, I was kind of, okay, I'm just doing this because my parents asked me. But later, I realized that had a meaning. Everything that I was doing, religious practice and praying and learning the catechism, those things, everything had a new meaning for me. And so I didn't realize at the moment. And when I could join, when I got a chance, when I was 15, I still had the same desire. I was like, okay, I don't know if I will be a priest one day. I don't know if God is really calling me to this. But I had this desire since I was 9. I want to give a chance to Jesus. I want to try. And so I did. But the circumstances were everything providential, because I didn't have like a financial condition to join the seminary. It was kind of a hard moment for my family. But God provided everything that I needed to just join and be with Him. And so I think that was the moment when I really could see, okay, it's not only my desire, it's not only something that I see as good and I want, but I can really see God's hand here, helping me to discern and join and be with Him, because I just can't explain how things are happening that way. I could see really, this is providence, because there is no human way or reason to explain how things are like fitting perfectly to those steps. So yeah, I think that was the moment. 2 moments maybe. When I was 9, I felt this desire, and later when I realized it was God speaking to me.
Well, thank you for sharing your testimony, Brother Gabriel. I can definitely relate to that, because when you find your vocation, you experience all this peace, this long-lasting happiness, and you realize that there's something higher here. And there's precisely that call that God has given you, where you can fulfill your mission in this world. So thank you very much for sharing your testimony. So now, speaking about the book, so this is a really famous author, Brazilian author, Machado de Assis, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us about him?
Well, as far as I know, that I learned in my high school and I studied a little bit by myself, he was a poor black man in the 19th century in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He was actually a grandson of freed slaves, And so he barely went to public school and studied something. Almost everything he learned was by himself, self-teaching, and really getting to the books and magazines he would find. And he had this ascension process in society. He went from a low class to a high class because he became a politician. He worked as Ministry of Agriculture and other ministries in the state. And little by little, he was becoming famous because of his chronicles and texts and writings. He was also a poet. And so that's how he was rising in society. And he was, or at least everybody who studied him, every specialist, they mentioned that he knows human nature. He had this ability to observe people from low class, middle class, high class, everybody, and really know their behavior, why they were acting that way. He knew these social constructions and social roles pretty well. I mean, all his books, he describes pretty well, not only the reality, the social reality, if it was a wealthy family or something, but also these psychological conflicts they had being in that circumstance, in that condition. And even sometimes he makes jokes and criticizes a little bit of the ideologies of those times. And so sometimes when you read, you can see his critics on positivism, which was an ideology pretty strong at that time. It was growing up in Europe and coming to Brazil and other countries. And so in the underlines, you could see these critics. And yeah, he was a genius writing. And also he learned other languages by himself. He learned Latin, Greek, English, German. I don't know at what extent, but he could at least translate into Portuguese and explain things in those languages. So that's, as far as I know, everything about his life still.
Well, thank you, Brother Gabriel. That's really interesting. It's really amazing to see how these authors were able to contribute so much to a specific culture, to develop a language. And they showed this mastery, as you say, of observation and of contemplation. We see it in the English language with Shakespeare, also with Cervantes for the Spanish language, Dante for the Italian language, and to see how they have left a legacy through their literary works. So now that we're speaking about Machado de Assis regarding Portuguese, what are some of his works and which one do you want to speak to us about?
Well, I want to speak about the first novel. Actually, it's called The Resurrection. Maybe it's not the most famous because it was his first and it was written in 1872. There's another one which is also very famous. It's called The Hand and the Glove, which was his second actually. Then the third one was Helena. These two were very famous. And there's another one that I couldn't find a translation of the name in English. In Portuguese, it's called Dom Casmurro, which is basically a rich man, and that's his name. That's the name of the novel. Those three are the most famous novels he wrote, and also short stories, which, they have no names, but they're very famous as well. And the Book of Resurrection is the one that I just read some weeks ago. I finished it, but I'm still resonating with the book, and so that's why I would like to share. And also because it was based on a very short quote of Shakespeare, and that quote struck me a lot.
What is that quote?
It is, "Our doubts are traitors, and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt."
That's a great quote right there. Precisely resembles what we were talking about. That observation of nature, that observation of the human condition, and how much can we relate to that? How many times our doubts have gotten the best of us, and they haven't allowed us to make that decision that we knew it was best for us. We see it, for example, in discernment. There's so many cases where you realize that God is asking something more of you, but you stay in your comfort zone because you have your doubts, you have your fears. And it's something that we all go through, right? But the importance is that we're able to see it and to overcome it. So it's having this quote in mind, our doubts are our traitors. How does the novel go?
So the plot starts with the novel with Dr. Felix. He is a physician, a rich physician, and he studied medicine, a medical school, and now he's 36 years old, and he has a new girlfriend every 6 months, a new lover every 6 months. But it's kind of funny, his character, because he is known socially, he has a social status of being a man of continence. So he never has sexual relationships with his girlfriends. It's something very simple, formal, still this first 6 months of knowing each other. But after 6 months, they break up, and then he moves on to his own life, and later meets another girl, and yeah, that's how his life goes on to the beginning of the story. And at the beginning, he has his second to last girlfriend, which is Cecilia, and he's about to break up. He's actually reflecting on that. And he's also reflecting, or Machado is portraying, how he reflects on his own life. And he is a man of reflection, very intellectual, and he always tries to control his passions, his feelings. He doesn't want his passions to control his life, to use his money or everything he has just for his own pleasure. He's always a mind man, always the mind controls everything. And it's the same thing with his heart. He wants to control his heart. He doesn't understand, and that's a funny moment because he feels something and his reaction is repression because he needs to control, he needs to understand. And so the story moves on. He breaks up with Cecilia and he is invited to a dinner in one of his neighbors' house with another friend who just appears in the beginning of the story. He came, they have a tea together, and then he goes to this dinner and he finds out that his friend's sister, who is a widow, is coming again to the city and she would be there at this dinner. And he once met her before, but he didn't really remember her face or her personality, nothing. And so he goes, he has dinner, he's dancing with people, with some other girls there, and he meets this widow. And he feels something. He's like, oh wow, she's different. She in certain sense struck him. And as the dinner moves on, they are dancing, having some drinks, he got a chance to talk to her. And so as they are talking, he actually seems very like a controlled, informal guy, very educated, polite, talking to her. Doesn't seem he's feeling something because he's used to control his feelings, his emotions, even his face. So he's very sober talking to her. But the author describes how he was feeling inside. There was maybe a little storm beginning there. And so he comes back home and he realized he fell in love with her. But in a different way because he already loved the other lovers he had every 6 months before. But with her was something different. And he didn't realize what it was. It's just that it was a kind of love that was different. And the story moves on. He starts visiting his friends because now she came to live with her sister, with her brother in the city because she lost her husband, and so she got to come back to the city. And they were planning to go to Europe for a nice trip, visiting France, Paris, and Italy, Venice, other countries, to have kind of a fresh air, a little bit out of Brazil. But at the end, he starts visiting his friend's house, and she realizes that she also fell in love with him. And so that's the drama. The drama starts there. And Machado, at this moment, this novel is a romantic novel, romantic story, but he also brings a little bit of the Russian influence he had on the psychological conflicts. And he shows both sides. It's Olivia, which is the new lover, how she has this conflict because she wants to go to Europe, but she just came back to the city, and now she finds a new man and she falls in love with him. She doesn't know what to do, and then this man is coming to visit her. And on the other side, this man I feel something, I want to be with her, but I can't show everybody that I'm loving her or I am feeling this because I have my image, my social status that I have to keep on and keep up with people. So, and he has to live this continent life. So, okay, I have to live my continence, you know, having my cigars, I mean, keeping people coming to my home and those things. But he is always visiting. He's always visiting. I don't want to tell the whole story because I want people to read the book. It's a nice book.
Yeah.
But as the story moves on, at the end, it's kind of increasing the drama. And at the end, both decide to get married. And she's super excited. She's like smiling and joyful. But he's like, I love her and I want to do it, but I'm not quite sure. Maybe, you know, I lose my freedom. I lose maybe money, you know, I don't know, something could happen. But he wants. He has the doubts, but he wants. Until the day before the ceremony of the matrimony, the marriage, the wedding, he receives a short letter from another guy, a supporting character in the story, that brings more doubts into his heart. And what he does, he writes a letter to her. He sent the letter and he goes to another house, farther to this friend's house. And the letter says, the one that he sent to her, I'm sorry, I can't do this now. It's not about you, it's not about anything you have done. It's about me. I have some doubts, I have some crises here, and I have to figure things out because I'm not sure if I can do it. And she cries and falls sick and fever and all of these things and a deep suffering. And Machado portrays that like super deep. You can't even cry with her because, you know, it's so deep suffering that she is going through. And he's just reflecting on these doubts and how to solve the problem if he really wants to get married or not. At the end, he's almost giving up on this love. But one of these friends, his friends is actually a friend of both the couple. And he knew about that, what just happened. And he goes to talk to him in this other house. He tries to find him in the city. He doesn't really know where he is, but then he finds out, he goes, and he spends 3 days talking to him. And he comes back and say, okay, yeah, I did something wrong. I regret my actions. And so what he does, okay, I would try to solve things. I would try to get married because that's what I want. I really want to love her, no matter the doubts that I have. And so he goes to her. She's now better after a whole week just in bed, resting because she was super bad. He comes to her and asks forgiveness. And she says, I forgive you, but we can't be together. Because if you have these doubts now, I don't know what could happen in the future.
Yeah.
I don't know if we would get divorced because you would have another doubt. You know, I just can't do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so both of them are very now sad. And he goes back to his home and he cries and he has this, you know, strong passions and feelings and this storm inside his heart because that was what he really wanted, but he couldn't achieve his goal. He couldn't have this love. And that's interesting because the story ends with 10 years after this, 10 years later, and both are alone. They could never meet another person. They could never get another relationship because they still have kind of this love, but they couldn't be together. And they try to keep up their social status, everything that we're doing, helping people. But at the end, they're lacking something. And this story was just basically, Machado explains in the preface, how he tries to explain this quote of Shakespeare, how our doubts are traitors in our lives and make us lose good opportunities that we have, good decisions that we have to make.
Right, because he got to a point where she couldn't risk it. When he came back, she couldn't risk it because he had already shown his weakness. He had already shown that he's someone that doubts.
Exactly.
And that doubt can lead him to the failure of that relationship in the long term. Wow, that's a great story, Brother Gabriel. And I think it has a lot of important themes. For example, I think it speaks a lot also about commitment, don't you think? Because in a sort of sense, Dr. Felix is trying to fulfill himself, right? Through his career, by finding a relationship, through love, right? But what he comes to encounter is that love requires commitment. And that commitment also requires sacrifice, because you're gonna have to let go of some of your own things so that you can be a good partner for this other person. And precisely here's where the doubts and the fears come in, because if the person is not able to let go of that, then he will never commit. And if he doesn't commit, then he's never gonna fulfill himself through love. So wow, I think it's a really impactful story. Also speaks about heartbreak, relationships. There's a lot of interesting topics here. So Brother Gabriel, how do you relate this with Christ? How do you relate it with the faith?
Well, I was reflecting on that. Actually, I was praying about this. Since Christ is fully God, but is also fully man, even because he was man, he also had these doubts. And we can see that before his passion, when he goes to the Garden of the Olives and he's praying, and we see this human weakness. Because, yeah, he's God, but he's fully man, and he is also vulnerable as man. He was subject to these doubts he had on embracing his passion, embracing this suffering out of love. And that was what, wow, that moved me actually, because I could bring from this story and relating with him and say, even Christ had these doubts. So when I have these doubts, I'm not just, a miserable sinner. I'm not just like Dr. Felix.
Yeah.
But Christ had these doubts, and he shows me what to do. And kind of this counterpoint with Dr. Felix, right? Because Dr. Felix had the doubts and he couldn't commit. And Christ is the opposite. Father, I don't want to do this, but thy will be done. And so he submitted himself to God's will. And that's how I can relate, and how he teaches me a lot. How to, in my own life, do the same. Submit myself when I have these doubts. And even more, I would say, relating with my own life, sometimes we have this attachment to images that we make of ourselves, or what people think of us. We have this image and we think, okay, I can't do this decision, I can't do this because this will change the way people look at me or what they're saying about me. And it's actually not, because God speaks also in our hearts. And sometimes he's telling us clearly, I want you to do this, I want you to go in this path. But you don't want to, because we have our doubts. We are like, no, but I'm gonna lose this, I'm gonna lose that. A, B, and C, I have to sacrifice, I have to let it go. I don't want. I want to follow my own path, my own plan, keep this image that people has of me, and that's good for me in a certain sense, right? We think we don't choose the better option that God is presenting, is put in our hearts. And so even reading this novel made me reflect on this. So many times I could make a good decision and follow God's will, but I preferred mine. And I lost a good, or I bet something better, right?
Yeah.
That was something that, wow, was maybe a mirror in my own life, and that for me was really good. And that's why it still resonates and helps me to put in a story what I could leave, but I can't really explain to people. But with this novel I can explain, and also presents how the great authors of literature, they bring into these classics the human reality they see. They can express through these stories and words and even short quotes such as Shakespeare did.
Yeah, that's right. And in any case, the weakness is not the worst thing, because as we see in the example of Christ, it wasn't about the weakness, because he overcame that, right? So I think it's just a matter of trusting God and letting his grace work through us. And in that way, when we find ourselves in that position or in that situation where we see that our doubts are getting the best of us, he can help us to overcome it and to go through it, right?
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Brother Gabriel. This was really interesting conversation. Thank you for sharing with us all of this that you have learned through this book. And we hope to see you here again.
You're welcome. Actually, thank you for having me. It was really nice. It wasn't expected invitation, but here we are. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Brother Gabriel.